I'm Rocco Gioffre, and I'm a matte painting artist. I've been a matte painting artist since 4 months out of high school. I started on Close Encounters of the Third Kind here in October of 1976, and I was hired as an apprentice, an assistant artist to the great matte painting artist Matthew Yuricich. I worked with him on that show for a little over a year, and the film was released in the winter of 1977. So we did a lot of visual effects work on that movie, I think over 250 shots, and there were probably close to about 50 shots that had matte paintings in them on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Matte paintings are used today. They're called digital matte paintings, and they're done with computer graphics, specifically and mostly done with Photoshop. But we want to harken back to the fruition, the beginnings of matte painting, and mention that the inventor, the guy who's credited mostly with creating matte paintings for motion pictures around 1903 or thereabouts, is a man named Norman Dawn. He was a very young artist, and he traveled around with his 35 millimeter camera on locations and was doing restoration shots of the missions in Southern California. In other words, if there was a part of an old mission that was ruined or missing, he would put a sheet of glass up in front of his tripod-mounted camera, and just like a window, he would do artwork on that piece of glass that would line up through the lens and recreate the mission portion of the structure. But matte paintings are used as a means to alter the look of live-action photography and create something that you couldn't otherwise get easily. It saves you from traveling to faraway locations. It can save you a ton of money in set construction. And it can also create the illusion of peril. If you want to have your lead actor on the ledge of a very high building, you can paint that in, and he could therefore not be in any danger. This is a matte painting of Devil's Tower, Wyoming, and actually this was an outtake, but it was designed to be used in 3 shots, which ended up being done with a miniature instead. But this got almost completely finished, and it was going to be used with as a composite with footage that was shot of the clouds in a water tank. Okay, so this is kind of an outtake, but you can see that it's pretty well completed. He's got some beautiful pine trees here, and all the rocks at the base of the foothills of Devil's Tower, and then this Devil's Tower itself was based upon a photograph. They had a photographic library that they assembled and shot on location, actually at Devil's Tower, Wyoming. I think what happened was that Steven Spielberg and our visual effects supervisor, Douglas Trumbull, they changed their mind about the camera angle while this was in process. This painting is an oil painting. Matthew preferred painting in oils. Sometimes he would put down a very thin acrylic sketch underneath that would dry rapidly, and you'd spray some fixative on that, and then he would follow with oil paint. But Matthew was primarily an oil painter as a matte painting artist, as was Albert Whitlock. Did not like to use quick drying acrylics. I'm going to mention that the notations that are up here in the corner, and you can see this is still part of an area of the primer that wasn't scraped off, but so that means, of course, that there's a little margin on all of these where the thing goes out of frame. But this R24, 11, 20 are 3 shots that this was designed for. And other than saying front focus, which was instructions, of course, that the camera would be focused on this plane, there's notations on this and on all of the matte paintings that we did. This says H 6.0 and V 6.0. That's the horizontal and vertical position of the painting when it was mounted in the matte painting easel stand. This is a matte painting that was used for the finale of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This is where the mothership actually turns over and hovers and lowers itself down toward the base camp that exists at the base of Devil's Tower, Wyoming, that the military had secretly built. And there's a cute thing that was happening here, a nice little inside joke that Matthew did kind of as a hat tip to the crew members on the show that he was fond of. He snuck their names into the detail that is painted up here. Here are the names that are in here. Steven Spielberg, see it says Steve. Mona Benefiel. Doug, that's Douglas Trumbull. Joyce is Joyce Goldberg. This is for Connie Egan, Connie. There's Larry right there. That's Larry Robinson was our effects editor. And Larry Goldberg is here. He was an attorney. And I don't see anything beyond that. I think that's the ones that I can see at least. No, this painting is done on Masonite, as were the majority of matte paintings that were done for Douglas Trumbull and Richard Urasich. They were the team that headed the visual effects. Our company at that time was called Future General. But these Masonite matte paintings are a carryover of the technique that was used at MGM, where they would usually have the live action being duplicated off of a sheet of glass in the foreground that had an area painted white on it, and that would reproduce the live action area. The lights would reverse. That piece in the foreground, the lights would go out on it, would be a silhouette, and the painting was done on Masonite. Masonite's a lot more durable. It's lighter and easier to handle, and less expensive than a sheet of glass, and less likely to have an accident happen that would cause it to get a crack that you'd be a hard time fixing. But that way, I mean, if the foreground glass was just made for just printing the live action, and it's just simply a piece of white on a clear piece of glass, that'd be easy to reproduce if something bad happened to it. There were reasons for doing paintings on glass, like the Devil's Tower painting that we were looking at, and that is if you wanted to have some lacy effect and have something happening behind it. But there are other studios that like to paint right on the glass. Albert Whitlock was very fond of painting on glass, and they do backlight stuff behind the painting. But MGM like doing matte paintings on Masonite, and we just carried that over. And I've always been fond of it, too. This is a matte painting that was done for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In this shot, the actual Devil's Tower is in the foreground. It was actually footage that was shot of Devil's Tower, but the sky was used to help segue into what would become later on in the film a more cloudy-looking skies. But I think what happened in this case, because it's starting to go from dusk to night, and Steven Spielberg wanted to have a much more pretty and dramatic sky behind Devil's Tower in this angle. And I can see that Matthew Urasich, who painted this entirely, actually the sky, he tied in with some live action that was on the location and reproduced a tree that was there very nicely. This shot in the film also contained some beacons that are visible sweeping across the sky nice and low, and those were shot as a separate element against black. And then double exposed in on top of the matte painting. These matte paintings by Matthew Urasich for Close Encounters of the Third Kind will all be featured in the Prop Store live auction.